Mr. Vice President,
what do you got?
Let's discuss how to properly greet a woman.
Okay, all right. What about a handshake? That all right?
Handshake is great.
Good. Okay. And what about during that handshake, I go ahead and I tickle her palm a little bit, something like that.
That's not great.
Okay.
I would say no tickling at all.
Really? Even on her birthday? Okay. All right. Okay, what if I see someone that's having a hard day, all right? Bear with me here. And I cheer her up by lifting up her shirt and blowing Zerberts on her tummy, just...
Absolutely not.
Okay, let me see what else I got. Oh, am I still allowed to do, something like that gorgeous lift that they do at the end of Dirty Dancing? Is that still okay?
Who would you do that with?
Hell, I don't know. Whoever's strong enough to pick me up, I guess. Coal miner, possibly, a linebacker.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. So funny. Still with us, we have White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, national security expert and columnist at USA Today, Tom Nichols, and joining the conversation, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of KCDC on MSNBC, Casey Hunt, columnist for the New York Times, Bret Stephens, and director of domestic policy studies at Stanford University and research fellow at the Hoover Institution, Lan-Hee Chen is with us this morning. Good to have you all this hour.
We have a lot to talk about this morning. Of course, most importantly, the Red Sox, the beginning of the Red Sox historic streak.
Right.
Ain't no stopping us now. We're on the move. One is the loneliest number. The streak begins, though, at 1. But Casey, we were just showing the SNL clip of Joe Biden. Biden gets the SNL treatment. I'm wondering, what are you hearing about Joe Biden's preparations for running for president and whether he's been slowed down at all by the series of reports, the series of complaints that were aired last week towards his previous behavior of hugging and whatever else those complaints involved?
Well, Joe, the one thing I can tell you is that it prompted a surprising amount of, in my view anyway, hand-wringing and concern among Democrats. As I was having kind of private conversations on Capitol Hill over the course of the last week, I had so many Democrats asking me, what does this mean? I mean, what do you think about, what this, how this positions Joe Biden? Does it make it, there was a lot of concern about whether it would make him less likely to run. How were they going to deal with it? And I don't think that the length of time that this story, went on over the course of the last week was reassuring to a lot of those people who, many of whom perhaps want to see Biden jump into this race, but are nervous about whether or not he can pull it off. And that's really telling. I mean, I think, according to, our best reporting inside the network, a lot of it coming from Mike Memoli, there doesn't seem to be a sense that this has changed Biden's mind necessarily. You heard him say on Friday, well, we'll see how it goes in a primary, seeming to suggest he was, ready to jump in. But it also doesn't seem to have moved his timetable at all. He's been saying all the way along he, didn't want to get in too early. He would let everybody else kind of sort themselves out before he stepped into the field. I think the question now is whether he, wasted whatever potential advantage he would have had going in. And, I think his fundraising numbers are going to be one thing really to watch because, he's acknowledged he's not necessarily a small dollar fundraiser like some of these other candidates. And, if he comes in this race at the peak of, what people are expecting as a front runner, it's much easier to fall from that position, Joe.
Right. And Mika, I thought it interesting. While the story went on a while, I found it very interesting. A lot of Democrats, I'd suggest most Democrats that spoke out, were firmly in support of Joe Biden, strongly in support of Joe Biden last week.
Yeah, and I feel like this is a major inside the bubble, inside Twitter check marks, blue check marks, inside sort of the very, very woke. I was surprised at the lack of criticism that our conversations on this show got last week. Usually they get tons. And, I did an Instagram post on Joe Biden, and it immediately got almost 10,000 likes, and all the comments were incredible stories about Joe Biden. So I'm not sure this story goes across the board. Yeah. Former President Barack Obama shared his concerns among the field of different-minded Democrats while speaking in Berlin on Saturday.
One of the things I do worry about sometimes among progressives in the United States, maybe it's true here as well, is a certain kind of rigidity where we say, I'm sorry, this is how it's going to be, and then we start sometimes creating what's called a circular firing squad, where you start shooting at your allies because one of them is straying from purity on the issues. And when that happens, typically the overall effort and movement weakens. You have to recognize that the way we've structured democracy requires you to take into account people who don't agree with you. And that, by definition, means you're not going to get 100% of what you want.
And all the people said, amen.
Yeah.
So, Brett
That's what I think
Stevens,
this story is.
we've already heard this morning that Donald Trump, while understanding that he has weak numbers in the upper Midwest, in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, Brett, Donald Trump still believes, is Brett there?
There he is.
Yes, thank you. Brett, Donald Trump believes that as weak as his numbers are, he's fine because he's going to be running against a socialist.
Right.
And Meek was talking about the bubble. It drives me crazy when people get on TV and they go, are they right? Columns talking about, oh, the Democratic Party is lurching far left, AOC this, AOC that, Omar this, Omar that. And the fact is, you look at every single poll that's been out, and most Democratic voters are saying they want a candidate that moves the party more toward the middle. I'm just reporting that. I'm not editorializing over that, but most Democrats agree with Barack Obama, if you believe the polls.
Yeah, the problem is Democrats and primary voters aren't necessarily the same body of people. Look, I mean, I think that if Joe Biden is disqualified or disqualifies himself from running over this, the Democratic Party has some serious, serious problems. I kept waiting for another shoe to drop. What I learned is that this guy performs Eskimo kisses and shoulder rubs, and if that's disqualifying in the age of Donald Trump, then the Democrats are moving in a very bizarre direction. But Joe, bear in mind, if Joe Biden does not run, the presumptive front runner is Bernie Sanders, and if that stays the case, and I don't think people should dismiss it, because I remember dismissing the idea that Donald Trump was going to remain the front runner despite his strong early poll numbers. If that's the case, I think a lot of people in suburbia are going to look at the devil they know, the 45th president, and Bernie Sanders, and stick with the devil they know. So that I hope Democrats gain a sense of proportion and reason and keep their eye on the big picture, which is what happens in November of next year, not what happens next spring, and nominate an electable, normal, middle of the country, middle of the road Democrat.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the way the Democratic primaries are laying out right now, Bernie Sanders is going to do very well in Iowa, most likely in the caucuses. He's going to win New Hampshire. And then you have the California primaries that are coming up. And the only person that's going to have the money, apparently, to stay on the air is going to be Bernie Sanders. If he wins Iowa, New Hampshire, California on Super Tuesday, you can look at all of those contenders who are going to be splitting up the vote 15, 16, 17, 20 ways without. And again, I'm just saying this, not giving my opinion on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But if Joe Biden's not in the race, then Bernie Sanders, at least in my mind, is a better than even chance of being the next Democratic nominee. So,
and,
Tom Nichol,
but Joe, people should just remember this could be a perfect replay of what happened with the GOP in 2016. People kept saying, well, just wait. Donald Trump only has a third of the party. Another candidate is going to emerge and is going to capture the sane heart of the party. Never happened. Momentum means a lot.
No. And Joe, if Democrats think that Bernie Sanders is going to get out of the race before the convention, even if there is somebody slightly ahead of them, I mean, if past his prologue, those people are, quite frankly, dreaming. I mean, I would welcome someone from the Bernie Sanders campaign to send me a note, to the contrary. But he doesn't even have to win those states that you outlined. The way the delegate system is set up, even more than the Republicans, significantly more than the Republicans, favors a candidate like Bernie Sanders. He's going to be set up to go into this convention with, even if he only has 20% of the delegates, that could be enough to make him a significant force. And, one other thing on Joe Biden, just very briefly, if you do think about this story, the way I think it has the most ramifications is that, Joe Biden is the friendly, why do you like Joe Biden? If you're a voter, what appeals to him to you, right? It's the fact that he connects with people. He comes across as warm and open. And if every single time he's thinking in his own head, oh my gosh, I better not cross this boundary. I mean, can you imagine what that could do to the authenticity of him as a campaigner? I think that is going to be really the trickiest line for Joe Biden to walk in the wake of this.
Yeah, I think Joe Biden just needs to be himself and maybe just be aware, because he gets tired and he tries to give a lot of himself out on the campaign trail. And when he sees people, for example, who feel left out or in need, Joe Biden wants to be there. And I don't think he should change that connection that he has with people. Obviously, there are things he needs to watch out for, but I haven't heard anything that really indicates that this man is anything but a very kind, connecting person and a great candidate, potentially, for the Democratic field. Which, to my point, Joe, it seems to me on Bernie Sanders, another thing to add on to Casey's point, he got ripped off last time. Big time. And that did not help the Democrats. It did not help the Democrats win the presidential election. I think it hurt us in many ways.
The early mornings after the Iowa caucuses, the Democratic Party quickly moved in Iowa to call the race for Hillary Clinton. Time and again, people believed that the head of the DNC was rigging the process for Hillary Clinton. The perception was that it did not help. Bernie supporters were angry. They had a right to be angry.
Yes, they did.
And it didn't bring that party together. But Tom Nichols, this field right now, at least, if Joe Biden doesn't run, and this field right now is shaping up as a dream for Donald Trump, because you have somebody who could be on the far, far left, somebody that's even talked about being a socialist, won 25, 26, 27% of the vote. And that plurality, maybe it goes up to 33% by the end, that plurality nominates a Democratic candidate that Donald Trump can just beat the hell out of and talk about being a socialist, whoever it is, talk about being an extremist on identity issues, and have suburban voters say, I don't like this guy. But we can survive him 4 more years, a lot more than we can turning the country over to somebody who's extreme on the left.
Well, this is one of the dangers of a primary field this size, because to break out, you're going to have candidates that are going to be trying to move each other to the left, and at some point, one of the front runners will say, well, that's going to be my issue too, reparations or the Electoral College or whatever it is. But think of what a strange moment we're in, that you have at least 3 conservatives, a couple of former Republicans agreeing with Barack Obama not to have the Democrats open fire on each other at this point, in the same way that I think some of the Democratic centrists are. It's interesting, because if you say this to people that are a little further left, they say, well, but Joe Biden, that's a different time, it's a different generation, you didn't understand. And I say, it kind of reminds me, wait a minute, he was only vice president a couple of years ago. We're not talking about somebody that was like, William Howard Taft's vice president. This is a guy we know. This is somebody who's vouched for by Barack Obama, which, if that's not good enough for the Democratic Party, then really, then at that point, there is no candidate who's going to be good enough for the Democrats. And I think, Brett, your point about this, purity testing each other into oblivion in the age of Donald Trump is especially a kind of a bitter irony for the Democratic Party at this point.
It's very hard to navigate.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.